Chapter 11. The first day, they ended up staying up until dawn playing tabletop games and drinking hot cocoa, and eventually Alan fell asleep again, and again. He dreamt himself back 70,000 years ago, and he was in a field dotted with distant caribou in the surrounding icy steppe. A small herd of mammoths trudged along the horizon, and he heard a carrying avian screech but did not spot its source. "I must take you to the first day," said the walrus of Whistletooth Cave, "and then you might again see the future." "The first day of what?" Alan said. The skeleton witch chuffed in a good humor. "Of it all." Together they walked out to the boat and headed for the ocean. It was several arduous hours of fending off smilodons and enormous eagles, but when they arrived, dawn had begun to break. "Just now," said the witch, and Alan was transported to a green field. An old man walked upon a mossy hill, seemingly not seeing Alan, as he soon walked right through him and didn't look back. The man was upright and carried a cane under one arm. "The first day, that's where I am." What could it mean? A pair of doorways appeared, and the man looked at them one and the other, back and forth. And Alan knew that the fellow must decide. Alan woke up. Inaya's friends had arrived in a single van. "Magnificent," he declared to himself, scrambling down the porch to greet his newfound company. There were the sisters Whitney and Dylan, several other people of various ages and backgrounds, most of whom Alan didn't recognize, including a quiet young woman with owl tuft-like ridge-rimmed glasses perched upon her nose. She was called Greel. They were all in the middle of introductions when another showed up. An iridescent motorcycle zapped up to the curb, and the rider became visible with an arcane command and a gesture. The rider took off the obsidian black helmet and revealed a black woman with half her head shaved, the other half in bright scarlet dreadlocks, and a face pierced in several parts. She waved to the wizard, who came shambling over, sauntering forth and again up with a rhythm not unlike that of a reticulated giraffe he had seen at a place in Florida once. The newcomer hugged the merry Lwyd eagerly and spoke in an accent Alan recognized from some of his grandmother's chiss and knitting friends. This woman was one of the Zulus she had met in her travels before her earthly death, and they had come to protect the region from further peril. The original Magnificent One, Jill, had practiced much under the giraffe bone priests of South Africa and of Tanzania, and she had grown wise in the arcane ways over many years of study and experimentation. "Alan," the big wizard said, "this is Aqua Duplessis," the lady said with a wide grin. "It's good to finally meet you. She's told me much good of you." "Excellent," the boy replied. "I'm so glad to meet you." When Far did not show up, the big wizard noted. "How quotidian of him." "Maybe he's late," Alan said. "Possibly," the reply came, "but it means he'll be ahead of us already. We must move now." Aqua nodded, and the rest of them piled into 3 vans in addition to the car and the motorcycle. The idea was that they would take separate routes to make things difficult for Jack's agents. Alan hoped they would all make it safely, as no aid might come, to their knowledge, should any vehicle be intercepted. Chapter 12. When Far's eyes bulged in dumbfounded surprise as he lowered his hand, gripping a blue glowing flintlock pistol covered in arcane runes. The melted mass of metal before him had until recently housed a phone booth, so the gun did work. He giggled at himself. Why hadn't it worked before? Replacing his safety goggles with a pair of pink-tinted shades, he muttered something muffled about the city's phone booth budget and giggled again. It was funny, because he wasn't actually in the city. He was only near it. He heard a voice inside his head. "Oh, you half-filled sack of truffle mushrooms," said a familiar voice. An old Welsh woman whose origin had recently passed away here in Pennsylvania. "Oh, why, hello there, Wizard Jill. What kept you? I might ask you the same." He glanced again at the twisted hunk of ruin. "I may have blown up my mode of transit." "Again?" the wizard said. "This is a remarkably consistent issue, right? I don't know why, but this time I do. It's because your latest fabrication is quite functional, but tends to go off at random. This event's timing is unfortunate. How soon can you be at the next portal?" "It might be at least half an hour." "Is the boy safe?" "Yes. For now, we need to get him to the agreed location before any of Carnival Jack's allies beats us there." Far rubbed his chin, then pinched it between forefinger and thumb, pondering. "Speaking of explosions," he said to her, "do you still have that staff you fashioned during your days in South Africa?" "I do." "Good. I'm told many large things dwell upon these lands. Not all of them are benevolent. Beware the lethal creatures Jack recruits, such as sloth trolls." "Aye indeed. but also the rampaging elkworms he's imported from the land of Yar. They stand meters tall and can rear up higher to grab prey from the branches of trees. I encountered a grootslang once, an enormous elephant serpent who was abroad in the Australian bush at the same time I was. Fortunately, she was both friendly and wise. An elkworm such as you describe could make a terrible foe, and I hope not many are so aggressive. I know of one, gargantuan even by their species' standards, who has eaten many humans and hungers for more human flesh. Pray your paths never cross. Chapter 13. Millennia. By the time Far got to the new safe house in West Virginia, Alan and the big wizard were already there, as were Inea and Whitney and a fellow called John Bellflower, who claimed to have studied mammoths at great length. And that's why I stopped patronizing the poor fool, Bellflower was saying to Alan. The two had evidently gotten on quite well, and they now sat opposite one another about a table with a checkerboard, each with a mug of homemade tea to hand. King me, right double quotation mark, Fui. Again, Alan said. You're doing great, John Bellflower insisted. Word of advice, though, the object is to not have to king me. Thank you, very helpful. The man bowed his head slightly. I live to assist others. Far smiled and left for the kitchen, overhearing the beginnings of a familiar yarn about talking mastodon gods. He had first heard this story at a summer camp in Macor long ago, whispered in the dark of night. The merry Lwyd ducked her skull head and sauntered into the kitchen and regarded him. Did you bring the prototype? Right double quotation mark. He produced the hypercharged gun, which still glowed a faint pearly blue. I done blued up a phone booth. Yes, I recall. That's some impressive potential. As they spoke, Alan lost the game fair and square. Then John gave him a high five and told him that he had fought valiantly. Unlike certain restaurant managers, he was on that again. The food wasn't even that great. Arrogant Burks. That night, Alan dreamt of mastodons and of fire clouds, of whistling abyssal tubulums and a whistling walrus. Then he was in a future Appalachia, whose flooding had reduced the mountains to a series of isles. Huge bison with long horns splaying out to the sides dotted the isles. Bison latifrons, from the Pleistocene, also known as long-horned or giant bison. Not since the time of Noah, of Gilgamesh, of the Atrahasis. The information appearing in his head told him, but humans caused this through industry. Alan wondered what year it was, and he woke up locked in a cell barred by ribs and femurs. The abusive nurse walked in. Alan dreamt about her sometimes. She seemed to exist in this future, so the year might have been as distant as 6474 CE. The nurse tased him and called for backup to restrain him. The roof was blown or ripped open soon after, and Alan stumbled out through the wreckage. I hope this year is better for humanity than the flooding and nurses would indicate, he mused. That is, on the assumption we make it so far. Angelic super beings were exterminating mortals. Alan and some ragtag travelers hid in an abandoned mall and tunneled into the ground to escape the sky patrols of corrupted sentinels, enormous brass locusts with lethal zap weapons. The mall had a long dried out pond that had once held saltwater fish, including 2 stingrays, several bamboo sharks, a horn shark, a panther grouper, and several more eels, along with tangs and wrasses and the like. Alan felt a deep sense of loss for them, and he had been loath to leave when they had tunneled deep. Eventually, after a harrowing journey in the dark during which many people died, they came out on a cliffside to behold the sun's place taken by an ultra-black and yet blazing maelstrom black hole thing, a whirling swirling eye of entropy. Emperor Prime had come, and the end was nigh. Before Alan could ask the architect for information, he woke up, and he lay in a cot in a tent in a valley. An old woman he didn't recognize, a Cherokee, he thought, sat on a wooden stool and clasped her hands together in delight. Ah, you're up. Remember, there's always hope. He woke up again in a wet gray static void and saw a spider crab completely covered in eye stalks and pincered limbs, floating in place like a zeppelin or an urchin. Then, finally, he woke up for real. John and the sisters had made breakfast. Excellent. This comprised scrambled eggs with shredded cheese and diced onions, bacon, cooked both with and without brown sugar, waffles, and an assortment of chopped fruits such as apples, grapes, mangoes, oranges, and strawberries. Alan wolfed down some of each as the others partook as well, and the wizard emerged from her designated reading room to see her friends and kin. It is a very great day, she sang, setting down an Ursula K. Le Guin volume, and then she began to brief them on what was taking place. As it happened, Carnival Jack seemed discouraged by recent defeats and was withdrawing some of his earthly forces. Was he giving up? If so, this time was one to celebrate, and to seek anonymity. Should he attempt to regroup? He must at some point. She said then, I know Jack. And he's a determined fellow, bitter till the very end, and now he must be even angrier. Still, the Golden King was beaten back for now, and that was jolly news. It was late October, and they intended to get something pumpkin themed, so they went to the store and got some food, though the wizard stayed behind so as not to draw attention from locals. Chapter 14. Moa and Powerkay. Alan had a hearty dinner that evening of asparagus and potatoes and bread and cheese, and he slept like a great wise horse and dreamt of spiders and mammoths and mastodons. The architect is descended from a line of golden green anacondas, silver dust and golden spirals of time, hollow shafts of light with spiders climbing up endlessly inside them, and crocodiles smoothly float past, and the lights piercing it, infinities upon infinities of light and time and space and reality, all humming within the strings of light. The architect falls through, an aesthetic ascetic, and holds out a claw for arachnid assist. None notice for some time, and eventually a bristling black batespide reaches to rescue. Now the crab with antlers is riding a black spider. Crunch lions prance around on a distant plains plain. A scrubland with shrubs and bugs and ticks and tugs, creatures, and spiders and tigers. This land is haunted by a stalking walking willowy womanly beast called a shriek. Shriek lions are elsewhere. Here they have eels in their oceans, as the locals say, screeching vines that snake around their prey and expand hidden thorns while constricting it. Wasps have been a lot of fun lately. Wasps and spiders and adders and asps, some causing wider damage than your gasps. Hold you your bladders and don't yelp but help. Local saying on the plain. A golden owl folds into place like reverse origami seen through a kaleidoscope, and assails the possessed scarecrow Carnival Jack. The Orbstone has witnessed it. Now there are immense steppe mammoths trudging across the cliffs, bellowing a baleful howl, and in the valley below, a few ground sloth, Megatherium, dot the forest and lean up to strip leaves from trees. The fish is here. An enormous floundering Flemish flounder makes a yoink noise through its sounder, sounding now a bit like thunder, tearing all the land asunder. Mastodons are an impending danger, said the priest man. According to sources, it later turned out this was inaccurate, and the politician man had said that. The priest man had then sued him, for he had described one specific mastodon as an imposing danger, not impending, and that mastodon wanted to kill Alan. His name was Cunia. Alan then dreamt about the architect's enemy, a silver crab with mastodon tusks called the prelate, which reached toward him with a long spindly limb to snap at him. He was in the cabin of a centuries vintage seafaring ship in the seas near southern Yar, and a great eyeball, a meter or two across, rested in a mechanical socket in the ceiling. The eyeball was not mechanical but immense and human. It followed Alan around as he paced in a frenzied consideration, and then the captain formed up from the very floor, grew into place and changed into a scruffy-faced man with a blank face above the nose. No sockets for eyes dotted his smooth upper face, all forehead. He wore a sea captain's uniform and epaulettes. Dr. Elskrab, the man said, you know why you've been brought before me, do you not? Right, double quotation mark. Who is that? Alan asked. I'm afraid you've got the wrong person. The blind captain smiled. Because we need your expertise. You can do things others among us cannot. I'm a dreamseer, Alan said. That much is true. I think you know that as well as I do. How? Alan said slowly. Could you know me? We've never met. A beast. A weapon. You know how to make what I want. Can he even hear me? Excellent, said the captain. Stod will show you to your quarters, where a lab has been set up for your project. Do not attempt to escape, or there will be repercussions. What consequences? What is the man on about? Suddenly, he was no longer aboard the vessel but entering an elevator. The doors closed behind him, and the lift began to ascend upward and outward, diagonally up away from the direction of the door side, and Alan wondered where he was going. The roof began to lower, boxing him in for what looked to be a lethal squeeze, and just as he was panicking and beginning to kneel below the encroaching roof, The back wall slid away to reveal a rooftop garden humming with mechanical bees. He crossed this and entered a small sunroom crammed with old books which was perched in the roof's center. A globe sat atop a stand in the chamber's center, but when he entered, the interior was different from how it had appeared from without. The books were nowhere to be seen, and instead he beheld numerous mineral orbs mounted on display stands. The globe had been replaced with the skull of a saber-tooth. A smilodon, he thought. How very conspicuous. Without much thinking it over, Alan reached out to touch the cat's prominent brown fangs. Just as his fingertips brushed the old petrified enamel, the floor vanished, and he was plummeting. He landed in a sort of lazy river of an alarmingly blue liquid, and he had to paddle himself left and right occasionally to avoid jutting concrete barriers as he was swept downriver by the current's inexorable tug. Eventually, he came upon a shore, a ground floor of what appeared to be limestone, and exited just before the water gurgled away under a barrier wall holding an immense cast iron grate. He walked through the corridor, suddenly inexplicably dry, and saw nothing for some time except colonies of glowworms clinging to the pale walls and illuminating veins of gleaming metallic ore flowing like blood in the ceiling above. He couldn't tell its composition, as it varied in hue from golden to brassy to silver to copper and bronze, even appearing as a molten mineral at some points. Alchemy. He kept going and eventually found himself in a great hall of the skulls of triceratops and various other ceratopsians. He even spotted a yinlong's crumbling skull, which he fancied rather resembled that of an ancient sea turtle. He spent some time reading up on the beasts, as somebody had thought to put placards in place that included English, Arabic, Farsi, German, and Hindi, as well as a swooping script of circular runes he had never encountered before. Some of the circles were open, resembling loose wiggly C's or numeral 8s or ampersands pulled loose. Some had dots or flecks within or next to the loops. Squid rune script, the helpful voice told him from within. He then spotted another lift, this one emblazoned with the striped golden headdress of an Egyptian pharaoh, and decided to enter. The door shut behind him and he was pulled back in their direction, oddly straight toward where the dinosaurs had been, but no collision occurred. Am I going to see the pharaoh's tomb? But when he got out, he was in a series of treetops in some distant misty time of eld, scanning the heavens for birds or aircraft. He saw none, but a ghastly avian screech split the windy ambience, and he ducked under the canopies to hide from whatever it was. Argentavis, Humor, Piercer, a thunderbird, the Simurg, Rock, Garuda, a Mori man festooned in tribal tattoos gestured for him to climb over a few trees, and he did. Watch out, the man said. The power K is hunting. Alan wondered if it would be identical to the South Island's infamous killer of moose, Haast seagull, both birds extinct for mere centuries in his waking time. He felt an odd impression, however, that an attempt to get to the forest floor would place him in yet greater peril. Carnival Jack, the carnivorous king, is trying to enter through a hut near Pretoria whose outer wall is lined with the skulls of lions and wolves, cheetahs and hyenas, large pythons and Komodo dragons. He woke up. Inaya was already downstairs when he descended the staircase, drinking a mocha and drawing pictures of harpy eagles, one griffonized by jaguar parts, a South American griffin of sorts. She said, setting her charcoals down and rising to greet him. Did you sleep well? Right, double quotation mark. Quite well, especially if you count the dreams. He told her about these, and she knew not what to make of most of it, though she did quote a bit of Shelley in response to the Pharaoh elevator. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. This reminded him of another ground sloth, though he couldn't say why. When he told her about the power K, she began to draw a tall flightless bird with ruffled rusty-red feathers like fur, a ratite larger than an ostrich, a South Island giant moa, she confirmed aloud, then decided to draw a broad-billed moa as well. After this, she began drawing ostriches and emu, an ornery-looking cassowary and some kiwis, an Argentavis magnificens and an elephant bird, before moving on to sketching various apes such as a cross-river gorilla and a Gigantopithecus, a huge orangutan. Like primate she said once coexisted with humans in the Pleistocene in the Chinese province of Guangxi. John Bellflower entered the front door then, struggling with two large and stuffed brown paper bags containing groceries. He leaned back as he wrangled them into the foyer, keys flashing and jangling in one hooked finger, then dashed to the kitchen counter in a mad sprint and depositing the bags with a grunt of relief. Brunch was served. Chapter 15. Elkworm Attack.